Welcome everyone. This talk is about the transformation mask. If you haven't seen it, it's downstairs in the art gallery. It's an art piece that we did in collaboration with an artist called Shawn Hunt, and we did this with Microsoft. Uses some Microsoft technology. The Microsoft HoloLens gives you a vision that you would typically see in a transformation ceremony. So we're going to take you through the production challenges of 3D fabrication. So in this talk, we're going to have a quick overview of what we're going to say. So we'll have a little video that we can give you a brief introduction of everything that Shawn is about and the background behind all the people that built the mask. Be looking at the paper prototype, a digital prototype, how it was modeled, how we went about 3D printing it, how we assembled it, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A at the end. So we'll start off with a quick video.
In the early years, it was always just like my dad was drawing, we would draw. When I went to high school, I continued to just draw the entire time. My workbooks, where I was supposed to be writing notes, were just all sketches. So drawing has just been something that I have done my whole life. I knew that the Microsoft Garage had a lot of really unique and interesting kind of tools and stuff that I was told would be at my disposal. And I met Stacy, and Stacy runs the garage. I threw some ideas at her, and she threw some back at me. Here I was given this opportunity to work with a bunch of things that I had never done before. The things that stuck out to me were 3D printing, which is something I hadn't utilized before in my practice. Stacy was quite interested in robotics, and then the third thing was Microsoft's HoloLens.
The amazing thing is taking a fine artist and curating and showing them what's possible with another tool, which is just technology. That, to me, is just amazing in itself, because he might now look at his work and think about it just a little bit differently. You know, for the garage, it's not only just about what we can do and what we're capable and how we can enable people, but it's also just about where the people take it, because that's the most important part of that.
So a transformation mask is essentially a larger mask that depicts a traditional crest figure that can then mechanically be pulled open with a string and reveal something else inside. So there's that, here's a bird, and then bam, it transforms into something else. And it's very theatrical. So the transformation mask is built on the HoloLens. And so when you put this transformation mask on, it transforms physically, but also the viewer is then allowed to access a world through the HoloLens that is inside the mask.
I think the collaboration is incredibly unique, and it leverages all of the strengths that we have both as a company here at Microsoft and as a team and a collection of artists, designers, programmers, but also as a community in Vancouver and, you know, connecting with history in a very incredible way, and in fact generating history for people to think about what the future could be like.
Using HoloLens as part of an art piece is pretty cool. Like, of course, there's always the artistic component of a HoloLens experience, but it in itself being part of an art piece is new. And also the communication with the hardware, with the other hardware, not just the HoloLens. The Bluetooth communication between the HoloLens and the Arduino, getting the mask to open and close on command, and synchronizing visual and audio effects between the HoloLens experience and the physical mask is pretty new. I don't know if anything's like that has been done before.
So usually when you have it open, it's Raven, you know, for instance, opening up to a portrait mask, which would be a human face. But in this case, the human face will be that of the viewer, and the viewer will be fitted with the HoloLens. And so you get this transformation from bird into human, but the human is not, they're like human 2.0. That human is also transforming, that human is also evolving.
Someone gets to go experience something inside that, and they get to have a complete audio-visual experience. The animal sound starts very normal at first, but then it transforms into this kind of cyborg, electronic, kind of weird screeching sound, representing it turning into a cyborg.
extremely exciting for me from a technical point of view, but it was quite eye-opening when I was talking to Shawn about the form and shape that he wanted to include in that, and the need from a cultural point of view of the types of shapes and forms. So there was a technical challenge there as well to try and match that form and make sure that it's true to tradition.
I think it expanded skill sets we already had, and you got to think about things in a different way when you're considering 3D printing. I think at this point we use pretty much every tool we have in the garage. Great exposure to the garage for myself, and it's something that's been on my bucket list to have a piece that I worked on in the Vancouver Art Gallery, so here we are, check mark.
In the world today, Microsoft today is at, I think, the point of the spear where we are digitally transforming our businesses, the way we work, and how we function in life. And this mask that has its origins, way before anything was ever digital, to be called a transformation mask, and to be here working with Shawn, who brings a part of the past and we bring a part of the future, and together we're transforming art.
I just hope that the viewer has an interesting experience, and I hope that that viewer may look at that experience and then hopefully relate it to a more traditional experience, or even just open up their mind in terms of what experiencing our culture might feel like. I've always been about, like, let's evolve this, find new ways to tell our stories. In order to tell our stories now, we have to compete with television. We have to compete with things like HoloLens. And so instead of competing with it, I'm encompassing it, and I'm using those technologies to tell the stories.
So there's a quick overview, and that's hopefully a good background to what we're going to be talking about in this talk. So a couple of things by the numbers. We had Shawn, the artist. We had 6 weeks to create this piece, this art piece, from start to finish. This was in our own time, so we didn't do this during work hours. It was in addition to, which was fun.
Yeah, and the 6 weeks wasn't artificial. We didn't just time box it. It was to do with that show at the Vancouver Art Gallery. We had to have this ready for its unveiling of that first night.
Yeah. We had three core devs. So Jeremy, technical artist. You want to maybe give a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jeremy Kersey, senior technical artist at Microsoft Vancouver. Right now I'm working on the 3D engine inside of Windows, and it's powering 3D in PowerPoint and Office products, which you'll see a little bit later.
And I'm Robert Butterworth. I'm a senior technical artist at Microsoft working on mixed reality in the modern workplace. Currently, I'm doing a lot of work with physical technical art, so working with electronics and physical workflows that connect into the digital world. So besides the core two of us, there were a number of other devs that ramped up pretty quickly afterwards. We also had an additional 4 people supporting us throughout the production phase. So there's like 88 parts in this thing. These are individual addressable lights, electronic components, 3D printed pieces, open beam, all the wiring harnesses and pieces like that. We used 4 printers. So we had one Prusa, which is a smaller piece that we used for printing all the mounting pieces to mount all the electronics onto. We had a Formlabs, which was doing high detailed resolution prints, and we had the 2 main printers, which are Ultimaker prints, and they were doing all the 28 plus 3D printed parts. We went through about 8 reels of PLA, and the print took about 300 plus hours. So over 6 weeks, 300 plus hours is quite a bit, and we had a print schedule 24/7. We had Stacy, as you saw in the video, coming in at like 1 o'clock at night, switching over the prints, making sure that we can actually get it done in time for the event.
Yeah, all told though, we did pretty good. We only messed up twice, and it was because one was air conditioning. The top of the printers was open, so we actually got some separation in the print, and instead of being solid, you ended up with this weird flexy thing. And then the other one was just human error. We were tired, and we totally underestimated how much PLA was on the reel, and ended up with a half-baked print in the morning.
But we've got some prints here that we're going to hand around a little bit later, so you can actually have a look at them, feel them. These ones are particularly strong, so you can check those out. We'll hand them out shortly. But to start things off, a little bit about the numbers, but we'll jump straight into the paper prototype.
Yeah, so the paper prototype was built out of form core and a bunch of tape. Shawn built that for us, and it was to help us understand the overall scale of the piece and also how it was supposed to function. So the first thing we did was cut his beautiful work in half and attach it to the open beam, which we have some of those pieces too. We'll show you. Open beam is if you don't know, is an extruded aluminum rail. It comes in a bunch of different cut lengths and attaches with a bunch of little nuts and bolts and nice angle brackets and things for prototyping this sort of thing. So we use this form to figure out, like, can a human head get in and out of there? Can we mount the HoloLens? Where are we going to mount the servos? What do the hinge points look like? And can we fit all that extra hardware inside? So as I was mentioning with the open beam earlier, like, that stuff was awesome for prototyping. We could quickly change the design. It's kind of like working with adult Lego, if you will. But we knew that we were going to put a lot of strain and weight on the mask, even though the prints are light. It was, the mask is about 1 meter long, so there was going to be a lot of weight there. So we used off-the-shelf brackets. We did a Home Depot run and got some stronger stuff and bolts and screws and things, which you see in there. Open beam kit, there's a lot of pre-measured length, so it happened to work out really great for us. Like,
a bit weird.
Yeah,
how it worked out.
It was kind of weird that how many pieces, how little we had to cut. Really just the 3 really long pieces that kind of the outrigger of it, and a couple of the angled brackets that we wanted to put in there. And you can see in the sketch there, we started measuring up the cardboard and all the open beam, and there's like hints of where we're going to mount the servos in there. And then we recreated all that digitally. So this was sort of our first go at that. We just roughly modeled the cardboard again, and we had a proxy model for the HoloLens. Later on, we were lucky enough that the hardware team supplied us with the actual CAD model, which came in handy when we wanted to go and build a mount to how we were actually going to attach the HoloLens to this frame. And you can see it's in the open position there, and we got a couple of Windows phones in there. So here we're looking at the open beam extrusion. So these profiles are things that are available on Thingiverse so that you can print your own connectors and pieces to work with this. So we just took that STL profile into Houdini and did the extrusions. And here's a little 3D in PowerPoint for you. So this let us catch all sorts of things early on, like the hinge points and mounting and where we're going to put the servos. And it was really critical, not only just to get the fit right, but like we mentioned with the print schedule, we really only had one shot at it, so this saved us from all the costly changes down the line. Okay, so modeling. So this was actually my first time using Houdini for a production task. We had received some models from another department in Microsoft a little bit before this project, and normally we would ask for our change requests and get them to change it and send it back to us. But Rob and I thought, hey, this is a really good time to ask for some licenses of Houdini.
Yep, get our dirty little hands on it, get into it.
Yeah,
do everything that we can day to day inside of Houdini.
Yeah. So we didn't build anything from scratch at work in that project, but we manipulated some of the stuff that they sent over to us, and that was kind of our first taste. And then it was sort of serendipitous from there. Like, I'd just purchased a new computer for myself, and I wanted to dig into this and into Houdini and some other software like Substance. So it just seemed like the right time to dive in and just go for it. Learning Houdini, I think the best way to describe it for me was like, it was addictive. Like, I've been doing 3D for a really long time, and it was like kind of opened my eyes, and how I solve problems and how I think about things has actually changed quite a bit since using the package. And I found the community like super helpful. Like, I think it's kind of built into the nature of the software, the way the nodes are and how you can repackage things and repurpose things. I found everybody is really helpful and totally willing to share with you, like, answering questions, sending you bits and pieces that can help you out, and just tons and tons of awesome videos online. And also, prior to this project, I'd never 3D printed anything. So that was kind of interesting. Go big or go home, right? But Rob had done a lot of 3D printing. He was part of the Vancouver hackspace, so he was sort of my guiding light on the design and all this. So, you know, him and I went back and forth a lot, especially on the parts that were meant to interface with the hardware. So why did we use Houdini? Well, other than, you know, the anecdote we just told you there about just being interested in it and wanting to get into it. You know, we'd heard there's a lot of great things about the precision of the software, which was going to be critical to us for the fit, piecing the print elements together themselves, but also with the hardware. And reliability, like, you know, not to dog other software, but, you know, things like Booleans work really well in Houdini, not so well some other places. And curve tools and the resample, skins and lofts, like those were all going to be really important to this project. I really enjoyed how it kind of felt like merging the best of both worlds in terms of CAD and artistic tools. Like I felt like I had that precision and ability to refine and deal with things like tolerances, but also still have you know, a really artistic focused set of tools where I could spend my time focusing on that and not worrying about the parts that would normally fall to a CAD package. One thing that was kind of an unexpected benefit in that we didn't really think of it ahead of time, but because of the nature of the model, the procedural nature of the package, we were able to slice up the model into our print chunks because, you know, we couldn't print it all in one hit. It had to fit in a very small print bed. So we were able to slice that up, place tongue and groove in between, which is how we interconnected the plastic pieces, and then the extruded piece that fit on the rail. And, you know, at any time we could just toggle through the pieces and visualize that and send it off for an STL to print.
Yeah, it was really good because the time schedule was pretty tight, so we could start prints. If they failed, you know, Jeremy could keep modeling, no problems. We just switch it out, keep going. So it was really, really handy.
Yeah, and, you know, because it's non-destructive, like I was working on lots of fine details and things on parts of the model that, and meanwhile we're printing things that, you know, the whole model isn't finished. Normally you'd have to maintain separate scene files and that sort of thing, but you're just able to keep moving forward. So when we first met Shawn, early in the project, he expressed the importance of the line work in his culture and his art form. So, you know, if you came through our airport on the way into Vancouver, you probably saw like a lot of Haida art, and you probably saw a lot of these types of shapes. Shawn is from the Celtic Nation, so it's a smaller tribe, but they have some very similar recurring shapes. He described the system to me as there always being a sort of tension in the line, so there's never any perfectly straight lines. There's always a little bit of tension there. And the shapes themselves, they do have relationships with each other, but there aren't any hard and fast rules about how you place them relative to one another. So, you know, he said it's something you just intuitively learn to feel. So that really stuck with me. So later when thinking about the modeling, just looking at the shape of it, but also what he had said about that line, it became pretty clear that, you know, curves was definitely going to be the way to go for lofting and being able to edit this piece as we went. So down in the bottom corner there, we're seeing a piece he called Raven GT. So that's actually one of his wooden carved masks. So it's a little bit of deviation from a traditional transformation mask. He modeled this after a Porsche GT, so that it was a black Porsche with the red trim line. And so you can't quite make it out in this photo, but it had, like, you know, air intakes and vents and that kind of thing, and really taking those elements from the cars. So other than the cardboard form, this was the reference that he had given us. So that's how I started modeling the first form. You know, we mentioned, you know, extensive use of curves and lofts and that sort of thing. You know, other stuff that came up a ton, poly bridge between the inner and outer layers, polyfills. You know, it was really nice to be able to take those curves and do a simple edit or transform and reuse it on the inside and outside of the mask, because you have to model that thickness, which is something coming from a games background wasn't typical, wasn't used to doing. And, you know, part of that modeling process, the tools I really liked, there was like some real gems in there, like the edit node. You know, it's got stuff like make circular, which I used on that nostril. You're projecting a curve onto that surface and trying to make that compound curve fit. And straighten edges, of course, and there was a sculpting node in there too, which came in handy later when trying to restore some of the volume. And normals are super important when you're working in 3D printing. You know, we visualized everything with hard edges because that's what it's actually going to come out like when you print. So if you see in the Raven GT there, you can kind of see the textural surface there because everything was hand worked with hand tools, right? Chisels and things like that. So we wanted to preserve that sort of element in the look of the model, but also build in some of the digital nature of it, right? So it intentionally has some faceting. We printed on a coarser setting so that we get that look where you can actually see the visible layers of the print. And then when I was mentioning the print slicing earlier on, you know, we just put switches down at the bottom of the network and propagated those parameters up to the top, and then that let us visualize that and export those on the fly. So this is an early model with a paint over from Shawn, so some of the feedback on the rough first model. You know, using the procedural nature and those curves, it's like super art directable, really easy to make his changes and integrate that sort of stuff. The early model actually led to a pretty big change in direction. Like early on, Shawn wasn't super familiar with 3D printing, and he thought that we'd end up with a fairly crude form. So his idea was to take, you know, a lot of computer elements and sort of upcycle them and cover the whole surface in these kind of materials and bits of Xbox controllers and that sort of thing. But then when he saw what we had done based on the Porsche GT, he said, okay, let's move away from that. Let's take the metaphor of a modern computer, you know, sleek and polished and beautiful on the outside, but you got this grading and this window is kind of a peak to the inside where you see the organized chaos of the electronics and lights coming from within. So here we're showing off what we were talking about earlier. So that's like the back corner of the mask. You can see the little tongue and groove pieces. So there's the male and female end of that on either side, where we used jet, which is basically, you know, like a glue that melts the plastic together. So the bulk of the mask was slid right onto the open beam, but then the interconnecting between the pieces was using that glue. The printing software we used accepts all sorts of model formats. We tended to use STL. We just found it really reliable as an export from Houdini. And there were some simple things to do to the main form that bought us a lot of time in production. So like the nostril and the eye is particularly detailed. But you know, we had to keep rolling on the prints. So just doing something simple, this was Rob's idea. He saved me a whole mess of time here. Just cutting those holes out of the shape and then being able to print all those pieces that you're seeing on the left there while still working on details like you're seeing on the right.
Yeah, there's a whole stack of considerations into 3D printing because you're laying layers up, and you want to try and reduce the amount of support that you have to keep time up. So these little pieces were done on different machines in a different technique to keep that process kind of smooth and fast.
And here we have the finished piece in PowerPoint 3D. And then with that, I'm going to hand it back to Rob.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, we're going to jump straight into the 3D printing stuff. So we used this Ultimaker extended here. It's a great little machine. So a little bit of background on how this machine actually works, and that sort of drives how we had to build our content. You can see in the left picture here is a cross-section of that 3D print. So you can see there's a number of pieces of the mask that we've laid together. In some aspects, this is great because then you can do one print, set it, and off you go, and then come back 14 hours later and it's done. Or if there's an accident or you forget to put a reel of PLA on, then you end up with 3 broken pieces. That happens like 12 hours in. So this was just sort of one of the first runs that we did, but we segmented it up into separate pieces a little bit later. The image on the left here is how the fused deposition modeling works. So you have, we've got this PLA material, which is like a plant-based material, which was kind of nice in a way because the traditional mask is made of wood. The plastic that we used is plant-based, so there's this natural aspect to the actual art piece. But this plastic is melted, then deposited down, and as it cools, it fuses with the layers below and creates a solid piece. One of the aspects of the 3D printing was making sure that you understand that it's 3D printed a lot of these printers can print at higher resolutions, quite low layer thicknesses. So we wanted to make sure that this was still visible in the art piece. So we intentionally made the layers a lot thicker, but 0.3 of a mil. Sounds very small still, but it's quite thick, and it gives you that texture that most people relate to 3D printed objects. There were a number of time considerations with printing, and having this lower resolution sped up our prints, which was fantastic because we had a lot of prints to do.
Yeah, it had an interesting side effect too. It actually introduced like little glitches where the print head was switching back forth direction, and you ended up with like little digital glitches on the surface, which actually kind of played nice with the aesthetic.
Yeah. I mean, some of these pieces here, the way that we modeled them, this one here you can see it was printed in this direction here. So you can see there's the tapering at the base here, that 45-degree tapering, so that we don't need any supports. If we went the other direction, then we'd need support for that 90-degree top piece. So there was thought into how we actually went about printing this without any supports. Supports takes extra time. There are means of adding in supports as well through like a secondary print head. You can use material like a PVA that washes away. So if you have really complex objects that require, structure, internal structure that needs support, you can wash that away. But switching between print heads actually incurs a cost in time. So we wanted to go with a single print head with the least amount of support as possible to get this thing done in 6 weeks and be on the floor, showing this piece. Have a little bit of time just in case we have some accidents, but luckily we had the amount that fitted in the time that we had allotted for accidents. We used a program called Cura, and that looks after all the slicing for us. So we just give it a solid model, and it will go through and do all that infill for us. But you can actually provide it with your own infill. So if there's a particular structure that you want for strength or for weight, you can actually model that inside of Houdini and then provide that to the package to slice up.
Yeah, and we also thought like didn't pertain to this particular project, but you can get clear resins and that sort of thing. So we thought it might be really interesting to build a unique structure inside that you can actually see in the finished piece.
Yeah. So now that we have these 3D printed pieces, we've got to put the whole thing together. So here's a little cross-section of half the mask. So you can see there's a number of pieces here. We've got this nostril piece, which was printed on a resin printer using a laser to cure. We had these other ones done on the Ultimakers, which is using the PLA. But once we had put all these pieces together, we had a form to mount onto the frame, onto the open beam. Tolerances were an interesting thing when dealing with materials that has sort of variations, and based upon temperature, these thicknesses can change. Tolerances are really critical. And we had a couple of points in here that were quite tight that we had to file out. But the great thing about the PLA is that you can get into it and you can just use a drill. You can treat it kind of like wood. You can use soldering iron in it or a heat gun just to flex it and bend it, put it back into the right position, which is kind of handy. So that was all glued together and screwed together, and we had some Gorilla Tape in there as well, just to seal up some gaps. Lastly was all the electronics that I had. I had to mount that inside there. Custom PCB that I made for this. It's running on an Arduino. It controls all the servo mechanisms, all the light inside, and it communicates to the HoloLens via Bluetooth. So you can see down the bottom right there is a Bluetooth controller. And just above it actually is an RF. So I've got a little garage remote where I can toggle the presentation mode just for giggles. And this is what it looks like when it's almost completed without the HoloLens. And finally, when you have the HoloLens in place and looking into the mask, it's quite intimidating, which is something that Shawn wanted as part of the actual ceremony. It is quite intimidating to do this transformation, to go into this into this mask and be transformed and see things that you would not normally see. So here we would have the user seeing, as you saw in that short overview, holographic experience that Shawn actually had painted in VR.
Yeah, Shawn really, we asked him at one point, do we want to soften this? Is this too much? Like, because a lot of people had that same reaction when they approached the piece, and he said, no, I really like it. We should leave it. And I want that tension. I want people to think about, hey, why am I inviting all this technology into my life? What is it doing for me? What are the negatives, not just the positives, kind of thing.
And here's a shot from the inside. So looking through the front of the mask to the human, or the human 2.0. So once we'd put all this together, we did make some alterations a little bit later after the show. So we went back into Houdini and we printed up some mounts for the HoloLens. So you can see some designs here that Jeremy put together. So we got a CAD model. We were lucky enough to have a CAD. I don't know how we got a CAD model. How do we get a CAD model of our own product?
Just knowing people.
Just knowing people. So we had a CAD model, and we were able to use that inside of Houdini to create the cross sections and produce accurate to scale pieces that interact with physical bars and the HoloLens to mount that in there. So that was a little afterpiece that we did. Yeah, and sort of lastly, opportunities. We don't do this as our day job, as we mentioned. We're software devs, so this was a out of hours project. But we thought, well, what would we do? What kind of tools would we want, or would we build ourselves in Houdini if we were going to do this every day? So the first one that jumped to mind was being able to do the slice and tongue and groove. Like that I manually did that all the way through this project, but that seemed like something super logical that you could just drop down a couple of points or an edge along your slice plane and have it automatically generate the tongue and groove for you. Procedural support generation. There is a lot of these tools in most print software that can do that sort of thing with you, but we thought, like, with this piece, we were trying to keep it to a single extruder, and the contact points often leaves like little connections and mars, no matter how small you make those. So auto-generating the support would get the job done, but having a little more user input and control over that would let you dictate where those points are going to occur, so that they're not so visible on the finished piece. Overhang visualizer, again, that's something you can do in Cura and other programs like that, but having that immediate feedback inside of Houdini would be super, super useful. So, like a printer can go straight up and kind of go over roughly 45 degrees. So, you can imagine sampling the normals and setting your print vector and visualizing that with some color on the overhangs. Volume visualizer, actually, this is something we had a chance to talk to Robert about. He suggested using VDBs for this, which I thought was a really great idea. He was saying some of his guys do that just to make sure that their mesh is totally watertight before they do a print. But one of the things we ran into is, like, as we were building the thickness of the wall, particularly around the eye section, I had done some sculpting on the outside and then didn't realize how thin it had gotten in the middle right at this one contact point, and then we ended up having to do a little last-minute surgery on the model. We just added another rail inside to stiffen it up, but that's something that could have easily been caught if I had that feedback. And then we mentioned earlier a custom infill generator. Again, artistic reasons, using some clear resin would be cool, or as Rob mentioned, just providing localized strength and weight distribution. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for our talk about how we actually went about using Houdini for this and printing these pieces. So if you have any questions, we actually have some pieces here that you can check out if you want to have a look. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can either ask them now, or you can hit us up via our emails or our Twitter and Instagrams. Yeah, and you can find us on LinkedIn, and then right after this, Rob and I will be down manning the mast down in the art gallery if you haven't had a chance to experience it. Thank you.